Here is everything that you need to know about debt and money in Forsaken Frontiers. This guide will cover everything from loot to debt conversions, intentional debt increases, loot density, and selling bin mechanics. But if you're looking for a more generic beginner's guide for the game, then I encourage you to check out the one that I released for the last playtest, since the info there is still relevant for the public release. I'll leave a link to that guide in the description below, so you can watch it before continuing with this more advanced guide. Otherwise, let's get into learning about what it takes to pay off your debt in Forsaken Frontiers. The goal of Forsaken Frontiers is to pay off your debt every 3 days, or there will be consequences. You go to different maps to collect loot to sell from your train, but in doing so, you'll find that there's a big discrepancy between the value of the loot you find and the amount of debt that you owe to the in-game government. So how are you supposed to pay off your debt when you owe so much from the start? And is it even possible to pay off what you owe in the first place? It turns out that paying off your debt is a lot more doable than it seems, but there are a few factors that will make the process more difficult for the unacquainted. The first thing to note is that debt values and loot values are calculated differently. Debt value is the amount of money you owe at the end of each deadline, as indicated on the debt screen in red text, and loot value is the amount of money you earn from collecting and selling loot throughout your session. The difference between the two is that the debt value has 2 extra zeros for reasons that the game has yet to explain. So the $10,000 in debt value you owe on the first deadline actually translates to just $100 owed in loot value. So for the first deadline of the game, you don't actually have to collect $10,000 worth of loot, you only need to bring home 100. Conversely, if you want to know how much money you've actually earned to contribute to your debt, you figure this out by adding 2 extra zeros to the values listed on your data deck, the map selection terminal, the store terminal, the selling bin, or the debt terminal. I don't know why the money in this game works this way. Maybe we'll be clued into the reasons why as the devs add more story elements into the game, but for now, it's just important to know that this is how the money works and converts. On top of this, there are 2 ways to increase the debt you owe during any given deadline. The first way is through dying during the deadline. Anytime someone dies during the deadline, that adds $3,000 to your debt amount, which translates to $30 worth of loot per death. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but if too many people die during a deadline, that debt amount starts to add up. The second and more significant way to incur debt is to travel to maps that you can't afford outright. Forsaken Frontiers gives you the option to go to any map you want, regardless of how much money you have. And if you can't afford the map you want to go to, then you'll have to add the calculated debt amount to your deadline. The reason this can be advantageous is not only because the loot is more valuable at the more expensive locations, but there also might not be much loot left at the location you've already been to, or there's a modifier that will encourage you to go somewhere else. The advantage of going to the same location over and over again is that repeat visits cost 50% less. For example, the starting travel fee for the metro is $15 and will continue to be so long as you keep going there. But as soon as you go to another location and try to go back, the first travel fee to the metro will be $30, and then each subsequent visit will be $15 after that. The downside to repeat visits is that the remaining loot value will decrease with each visit. This decrease is listed under remaining value just below the map terminal, and the percentage listed there reflects the current loot density of the location. So if the number gets too low, you should consider going somewhere else. The other factor you should consider when choosing a location to go to is the map modifier. There are a handful of modifiers in the game that will either add a positive or a negative effect if there's one listed. Positive effects will be listed in green, negative effects will be listed in red, and if there are no modifiers, then it will just say none. So for example, surplus is one of the best positive modifiers you can get, and is the one time you should ignore the remaining value of a location, because surplus forgoes this remaining value and maximizes the amount of loot that you can find on each map. I'll leave a list of known modifiers here up on the screen, but this video is more about debt and money, so I'll make a different video about map modifiers sometime this week. But while we're here talking about travel fees, I'd like to explicitly point out that the money you spend on travel fees is the same money that you use to pay off your debt and also to purchase store items. I bring this up because my groups have forgotten about that sometimes, and that can either lead to us buying so much equipment that we can no longer afford to go to the map that we wanted to go to, or we spend all our money going to an expensive map on the last day of the deadline, only to not earn enough money to pay back what we owe. And if you can't pay off your debt, then there will be consequences, but not immediately. If you don't have enough money to pay off your debt, you get one last chance opportunity to collect enough loot to do so. Pulling the lever without paying off your debt when prompted will take you to a secret, one-time only location that has both the highest loot values and highest danger levels in the game. And if you still can't pay off your debt after that, then your run is over. But let's say that you do pay off your debt. What then? If you successfully pay off your debt, then your deadline will reset and you will owe a new and increased amount of debt. The amount you owe at the start of each deadline is fixed. So you will always owe $10,000 on your first deadline, $40,000 on your second deadline, $60,000 on your third deadline, and there will be a $20,000 static increase to your debt per deadline after that. The amount of additional debt you incur from deaths and travel fees only apply to the deadlines that you incur them on. So even if you somehow incur $1 million in debt during your first deadline, your second deadline will still start at $40,000 so long as you were able to pay off what you owed. So don't worry too much about the long-term effects of extra debt if you're confident enough to pay it off. The last thing you need to know about money in Forsaken Frontiers is how the selling bin works. At the end of each day, you will have an opportunity to sell the loot you've collected using the selling bin in the back of the train. The two monitors above the selling bin show the percent value that the government is currently buying for, and the second monitor shows the loot value that's held inside of the bin. The percent value that the government will buy for is a fixed amount. So the government will always buy at 60% after the first day, 70% after the second day, and 100% after the third. So in most cases, you'll want to wait to sell after the third day so you can maximize your return. But there are a handful of scenarios where you might want to sell earlier rather than later. For starters, you can only put loot in the selling bin before leaving for a location. Once you've taken your train to a map, the selling bin will close and you'll have to leave from your location in order to add to the bin again. You have the option to store loot in the selling bin without selling, which can be advantageous so that if you die at a location, you won't die with all your loot on hand. But the risk is that if your team wipes while you're out at a location and you were storing all of your loot in the selling bin, then you will lose all of your unsold loot during that wipe. The only money that isn't affected by death is the amount you've already earned after selling. So if you had $35 in the bank and your team wiped on the next landing, then you will still have $35 when you spawn back in. So you might want to sell early to ensure that you can pay off your debt regardless if your team wipes. Or you might want to sell early so you can afford a better map or better equipment. As for store items, they're all useful in their own way, and I'll be making an equipment guide soon to go over all of their uses. But as far as the store items go in terms of your money, you'll want to check the store every day for new sales, since different items go on sale every day. So this will be something to look for in addition to map modifiers. This debt and money guide ended up being more comprehensive than I anticipated, but I wanted to be as detailed as possible so that people can not only understand the economy that they're working with in this game, but also so they can start coming up with strategies for both high quota runs and speed runs. The team over at speedrun.com is already working on adding speedrunning categories for the game, and I personally will be introducing a handful of challenge runs to the community over the course of the next few weeks. So people who want to push this game to its limits like I do should familiarize themselves with the numbers shared here. And if there's anything I missed about how debt and money works in this game, then let me know in the comments below so that this can be a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about debt and money in Forsaken Frontiers. But that's all I have for this video. Next Forsaken Frontiers guide will be a guide on how to deal with all the monsters, and I will see you there or over on Twitch where I stream all of my gameplay. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.
You